On Rare is a podcast developed by BridgeBio. Since our guests aren't scripted and are free to speak their minds, their views and opinions don't necessarily reflect the views and policy of BridgeBio Pharma. Now, we hope you enjoy the podcast.
Welcome to On Rare, a rare disease podcast produced by BridgeBio, a biotech company that works on developing treatments for rare diseases. At On Rare, we explore what it's really like to live with a rare disease. Not only do we get to learn a little bit about the science of a rare condition, but we also get to hear from people living with these challenging conditions. I'm your host, Mandy Rohrig, a member of the patient advocacy team, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, David Rintel, head of patient advocacy. Today we're talking with Jihan, wife and mother of 3 daughters, 2 of whom live with a rare condition called congenital adrenal hyperplasia, or CAH. CAH affects the adrenal glands, 2 tiny walnut-sized organs which rest on top of the kidneys. While the adrenal glands are small, they produce really critical hormones that regulate stress, sodium and potassium levels, as well as sex hormones that are important for both males and females. Hi, David.
Thanks, Mandy. Before we talk to Jihan, I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, the Chief Medical Officer for Gene Therapy at BridgeBio, Adam Shaywitz, who's going to give us some medical and scientific background so we understand congenital adrenal hyperplasia better. Hi, Adam.
Hi, David. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure, and we're really happy to have you. What is congenital adrenal hyperplasia, which I think we should just call CAH? What is CAH?
Sure. So CAH is a genetic disorder caused by problems in the adrenal gland required for the production of cortisol and aldosterone. Critical hormones, they're really responsible for keeping you alive. They help keep your blood pressure up by keeping salt in your body. They prevent you from becoming hypoglycemic. They play a critical role in allowing your body to respond to stress. So the ability to make cortisol and aldosterone at the right time and in the right amount is really essential for your body to function properly. So this is a genetic deficiency. It's inherited in an autosomal recessive manner, which means that you need to get 2 defective copies of the gene, 1 copy from their mother and 1 copy from their father, both of which are not functioning properly. And so there's really a 1 in 4 chance or 25% chance that a baby will be born with congenital adrenal hyperplasia due to 21-hydroxylase deficiency.
So, Adam, just to make sure I understand, in order to develop CAH, you need to have each of your parents to be a carrier for CAH, and that even when both parents are a carrier, there's still only a 25% chance for any pregnancy that the child will have CAH. Is that correct?
Yes, that's exactly right, David.
Okay. And when the child does have CAH, that gene doesn't function correctly in terms of not producing the enzymes that are responsible for the body to produce cortisone and aldosterone. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's exactly right, David.
And when people with CAH talk about the medication they're taking, which is, you correct me if I'm wrong, but which is to replace the cortisol and aldosterone.
Sure. So the hormone that the body normally makes for cortisol is hydrocortisone. So if someone is taking hydrocortisone, they are essentially taking cortisol. You may hear prednisone basically replaces cortisol. You can take that generally once a day. Hydrocortisone has a shorter half-life in your body. So generally people take it or need to take it multiple times a day. There is also a longer acting form of cortisol called dexamethasone that is also slightly different, but can be used to replace their cortisol. Many people with CAH also need to take a form of aldosterone, another critical hormone made in the adrenal gland. Aldosterone is critical to pull salt back in your body, and salt keeps your blood pressure high. So people who can't make aldosterone will lose salt. These people are known as salt wasters, and that will cause the blood pressure to drop.
Now, people with CAH will sometimes refer to an injection that they need to take when they're ill or something happens. And the name of that is Solu-Cortef. And I wonder if you could just tell us what that's all about.
Yeah, so that's stress dose steroids, and that is a way of getting a lot of cortisol into your body very, very quickly. If you're getting sick and you can't make the amount of cortisol that your body would normally need to respond to this sickness or stress, then you could get even sicker.
I see. I've heard people with CAH talk about concerns about having an adrenal crisis, and I wonder if you would tell us what that is.
Sure. So, an adrenal crisis is really when you need a lot of cortisol or aldosterone and you can't make it. So, it's generally brought about by some external stress like sickness or a viral illness or infection. And if someone doesn't have a problem with their adrenal gland, you'd be able to mount a response. Your adrenal gland would sense there's an infection and would make more aldosterone and or cortisol, and that would help your body not get sicker. But when you can't mount that response, you're at risk of blood pressure becoming low, blood sugar becoming low. An adrenal crisis is actually life-threatening.
So on the one hand, a person with CAH can take some form of cortisol and aldosterone and, you're doing okay. But it sounds like the current treatment is really not good enough because your own adrenal gland can't produce more on its own.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's three main problems that are associated with CAH. Two of those are related to the disease itself, and one of them is related to the treatment. So adrenal crises, unfortunately, there is not necessarily the awareness of adrenal insufficiency or not have stress dose steroids available. So people still actually die of adrenal crises, which is really something that should not be happening in 2022. There's also another problem. People with CAH wind up making very high levels of sex hormones like androgens, things that are like testosterone and can cause masculinization. And that can have a lot of problems in childhood. Having androgens that are too high can cause problems with sexual development, height, and can also cause problems as you get older. So women in particular are very sensitive to the signs of hyperandrogenism. Hirsutism can cause problems with the menstrual cycle and result in subfertility. Men can also have problems with fertility as well. We're lucky right now in 2022 that we have drugs that can treat CAH. And these drugs were discovered over 70 years ago in the 1940s and 50s.
Mm-hmm.
And these are cortisol replacements. But the problem is that even though we can prevent adrenal crises and we can allow a lot of these kids that would have died to now live productive lives, but when we give people with CAH cortisol in the form of medication, aldosterone in the form of medication, we wind up either overshooting or undershooting. It's really impossible to get that seesaw perfectly balanced. So we often wind up giving too much cortisol, and that causes problems. People get brittle bones. Taking high levels of cortisol for too long can cause high blood pressure, can cause weight gain, diabetes. It's really a sort of trying to thread that needle, which is almost impossible. Ideally, the treatment would be a way to get the body to make cortisol and aldosterone at the right time and at the right amount.
Thank you, Adam. This has given us a lot to think about and really helps prepare us for our conversation with Jihan. So thank you. This has been enormously helpful.
Sure, David. It's been my pleasure.
I'm so pleased to introduce Jihan. Jihan, how are you today?
I'm doing well, David. Thank you.
I've had the pleasure to meet Jihan's family. You have two daughters, Isabella and Alessia, who have CAH, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, and they are the oldest and youngest, and Giordana in the middle does not have CAH. But I think we should start at the very beginning with Isabella. Just walk us through what the experience was, if you would.
Okay, well, as most parents of children with CAH, your firstborn, you never know that they have CAH. It's always a surprise. So my pregnancy with Isabella, we call her Bella, My pregnancy with her was actually my best out of the three. I was teaching fourth grade at the time, so I had like 35 fourth graders at that time. Going up the stairs to my classroom, it was a great pregnancy. I had a previous issue, nothing major, but they told me that it had to be a C-section, and I had the C-section. Everything was going perfectly during pre-op. We thought that we were having a healthy child. One of the techs mentioned during the ultrasound that her genitalia was maybe a little swollen, but there really wasn't anything that concerned them. So again, going back to the C-section, they had to kind of like sedate me because he wasn't able to take her out. So my blood pressure started going down, my heart rate started going up, I started having chest pains, and I told my husband, I'm having chest pains, I'm not feeling well, something's wrong. A few minutes later, I woke up and she was already out, and I stare at my left and I see the nurses kind of like whispering, and I see them staring at the doctor, and they just keep staring at each other and whispering. And I'm like, what's going on? Like, what's wrong? The next thing I remember is then waking up in the room, and the baby obviously not with me in the room. That's the whole story of the actual birth.
So sorry to hear that was so traumatic, and you woke up just to see that in the eyes of the healthcare providers that there was something unexpected, and that's got to be so hard.
Yeah, it was very traumatizing. I'm not the only one that has gone through this. I've spoken through so many moms throughout the years. Usually the first one is very similar to what I experienced because the health professionals are not aware of it. Now, nowadays, it is a little bit easier. The endocrinologists, the OBs are a little bit more knowledgeable in terms of CAH. So I think it was more when you speak to the parents that had kids with CAH 10, 15, 20 years ago. And obviously even before that, that was very common back then.
We are very interested in hearing, what happens next. So you wake up in the hospital room, the baby is not with you. What happened next?
After that, it was, that was the other traumatizing part of that experience. So I had my family in the room. My husband told me what had happened. Then my mom told me that there was something wrong with the baby. I'm just panicking at this point. If you see the pictures of me during that time, I'm just like swollen of crying. It was traumatic. So I had the neonatologist come in. She was the first one. She was not very tactful in the way that she expressed the situation. Then I remember an endocrinologist that was there. But the person that I remember the most, and I thank him till this day, is the urologist. He actually came from the children's hospital to come visit me, to actually explain to me what the situation was. And we actually see this doctor to this day. So he's our pediatric urologist for the last 15 years. Like I said, to this day, I'm very thankful for him because he was able to tell us a little bit more about what we were going to go through, in terms of later on the surgeries and all that stuff. And that's about it in terms of that. It was just a lot of crying and a lot of trying to understand. One last thing that was the most traumatizing out of everything was when they brought her to the room in the little bassinet. They did not put a pink sign in her bassinet. They put a gray sign. So that to this day just...
So may I ask a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, I'm also a mother, so I'm just sitting here. I can only imagine and appreciate how terrifying that must have been for you laying in that bed and not seeing your child. So I'm just curious. So they brought you back to the room, but when did you get to see your baby?
They brought her in, once all the professionals came to speak to me,
But that was the first time you saw your child after you delivered her. That was the first time.
Yeah. They brought her in that bassinet. Usually they'll put baby girl and your last name. They just put baby and the last name on a gray sign.
Oh, man. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
How did you learn that there was something different about Bella?
Eventually, they explained to me that it was an adrenal disorder. And again, I really didn't know much about any of this. The funny thing is, I started teaching fifth grade the following year after I had her. And I taught science. So then I started learning about the endocrine system. And I was like, oh, so I started like, as I was teaching my students, I was kind of like learning it myself. I really did not understand it at first. This was back in 2007. As I was telling Amy last week, I did not have social media in 2007. So I just knew whatever they were telling me.
Amy, being Amy Brooks, our wonderful producer of this podcast, she sets up a tech checkup with our interviewees. And it sounds like you had a really nice conversation, Jihan, when that happened. So,
yes.
So it sounds like the pediatric urologist really explained this to you in a way that you not only recall, but you really stayed with this urologist. So what did the pediatric urologist tell you while you were there still in the hospital?
He put it in basic terms. The fact that her genitalia was a little bit different than a normal girl's, that she would need surgery later on if we wanted to go that path. I was very groggy at that time. Remember, this was during the parade of the professionals. So he kept it kind of like short and sweet. After that, we kind of just tried to be parents to her. We had the family. She obviously has to stay in the NICU. I got discharged and she stayed. She also presented with some jaundice, like most babies do. And then she started getting treated with the hydrocortisone and the fludrocortisone. Now, we had an endocrinologist during that time. He basically just told us what the condition was. Here are the meds. You can go home. And we went home. About 2 weeks later, we got a call from another endocrinologist. She had seen the newborn screening and she goes, listen, I'm Dr. Carrillo. I'm a pediatric endocrinologist. You need to go to the hospital right now. You should not be home. So she was 2 weeks old. She was gray. We had no idea what we were doing. We really, really had no clue what we were doing. We took her to Jackson, and that's where we met Dr. Carrillo for the first time, which is our current endocrinologist. And we were there for almost a week, just trying to get everything going and seeing, how we could actually get her stable at that time. That's the beginning. Imagine, your first 2 weeks and driving to hospitals. I couldn't really rest at that time. Those were the first 2 weeks of her life.
A 2-week delay after a newborn screen is 2 weeks too much, right? Like there should have been more information and more certainty provided to you and your family much sooner than 2 weeks after Bella was born.
Exactly.
Yeah. Jihan, you described traumatic events in the first 2 weeks of Bella's life. Just the parade of healthcare providers and their faces, and they're not telling you. Then being sent home without adequate instructions. It sounds like you should not have been sent home with Bella because she needed to be stabilized on her replacement steroids. And I just want to go back to something. The way that the healthcare providers in the hospital where Bella was born knew she had CAH was because she was born with ambiguous genitalia. Is that right?
Yes.
So it was before the newborn screening information came through, but they identified it as an aspect of CAH. I think that's important. And the other thing, I'm so grateful that the pediatric urologist said, your little girl has this condition. You may choose to have surgery later. That there was no question about who she was and clarified that for you. Since the gray sign in her bassinet, Amanda and I have both been healthcare providers, and it just sounds like you and your family were really mistreated during those days.
Oh, I just think of I can imagine that gray sign was just almost reflective of the uncertainty that you were about to face, right? And it was, and the lack of clarity and the lack of guidance that you were getting from these healthcare providers that were supposed to be providing support and care to you and your daughter.
It was a very terrible time. That's why I get choked up whenever I speak, especially about that gray sign. That gray sign always gets me.
It could have been kinder to you.
Exactly. All that whispering, all the looks, that's usually, and again, that was very common back then. I speak to all these moms, that I still keep in contact with, and we all had a very similar experience where it was just these stares and these whispers, like, because they're looking at the baby and they had no idea what was going on. Like, why does the child look like this? Because CAH is a rare disorder. So I do understand to a point, but they could have been more professional. Yeah, they didn't have to act the way that they did. I obviously left that OB. I left that OB after that. I never saw that person.
I'm also
again.
struck by the gray sign in the bassinet, and that Bella was kind of gray colored after you brought her home because her medication wasn't stable. And
it wasn't. And that's one of the signs of an adrenal crisis. Once the child goes gray, you need to run. You either need to inject automatically and just run, because that is a sign that they're going through crisis.
So Dr. Carrillo calls you and says, bring Bella into the hospital. You shouldn't be home. So what was that experience like, and what did Dr. Carrillo tell you about Bella and CAH, and what did you learn?
She explained everything. She explained what the actual disorder was. She told me to go online and get the CAH book for parents. And I ended up buying 2 copies, and I gave one to my pediatrician. Her blood tests showed her levels, so she was able to give us the correct dosage of the Cortef and of the Florinef at that time, because, they go by different names, but it's the same thing. It's the hydrocortisone and the fludrocortisone. When they're babies, they also have to take sodium chloride. So that's until they eat the solid food. So she gave us the sodium chloride as well. That's about it. We just went home after that week and just took care of her here at home the best that we could. And we just stocked up on everything and just tried to enjoy her the best we could now that we had her home and we had her stable. We had good times and then we had bad times, because as you all know, as a parent of CAH child, just any illness can just make your world, crash down. It can be anything. It can be something as simple as a stomach bug or fever. So her life has been a lot of ups and downs. We basically lived in the hospital and the pediatrician's office those first few years. We tried to make sure that she had a normal childhood. I tried putting her in daycare because obviously I was teaching. We tried so hard, and she had a hand sanitizer like around her neck. I used to buy these like spray sanitizers. The director of the daycare center thankfully let her join the daycare, because I don't know if you guys know, but a lot of daycares don't take kids with CAH because of the injections and the medications.
No, I didn't realize that.
Thankfully, because I worked a few blocks from the daycare, I spoke to the director and I go, listen, if anything happens, just call me. I'll run out of school and I'll go over there.
And the medication is replacement of the cortisol that a child with CAH doesn't produce. So why the injection?
Okay, so the injection is the Solu-Cortef, and we basically know it as the emergency injection. If the child, for example, has a persistent fever, and that fever, you cannot get it down with anything, you need to give the shot. The shot is basically, it's a little powder with a liquid, and you shake it and you inject it. That's one of the things that you can use it for. Again, high fever. The other one is vomiting. That's the one that we've used it most for, because obviously if the child is vomiting, then they cannot take their oral meds. Most of the times that we've injected both girls has been because of the vomiting.
Did you have occasion to use the injection during her first years?
We had an occasion to use it when she was about 3, but I was so nervous about using it that I ended up not using it at that time and just taking her to the emergency room. That's actually something that I regret to this day. She ended up having walking pneumonia from the daycare, and she was in ICU for 3 days, unresponsive, unconscious. They were doing brain scans and everything because she just wouldn't wake up. I should have, again, like I said, I regret not doing the injection, but I had no idea what I was doing. I had never injected anybody in my life. So I thought I did what I needed to do by just taking her to the ER. But they apparently didn't know what to do either. So they took too long to get her meds and the IV in. But after that, we've had several occasions to administer the injection. In her case, she can't even walk or talk throughout the years. That's what we've noticed. So they become gray, they can't move. So in those situations, protocol is administer the injection and go straight to the hospital. So that's what we've done.
And Jihan, we've heard from other families that whether it's an ambulance where, a child is going into adrenal crisis, which means a real drop in levels and the need for care, and that the ambulance drivers don't have the injection and they won't even give the injection if you're holding it, and you go to the emergency room, and the emergency room, as you describe, often doesn't really know how to treat emergencies for children with adrenal insufficiency having adrenal crisis, which can be a life-threatening condition, as you know only too well.
That's exactly what happened when she had the walking pneumonia. I had come from work and she was unresponsive, and I called 911 and I had the injection with me. But like I said, I had no idea what I was doing. So when the paramedics came in, I gave them the injection and they told me that they couldn't administer it. So that's when I had to rush her to my car and drive to the children's hospital because they refused to administer the injection.
Caring for a very young child, any child really with CAH, really puts so much responsibility on parents. Although I know the advocacy organizations are very involved in, sometimes you have to get laws passed or regulations passed to get ambulances allowed to use this.
And they have in several states, but here in South Florida, if I'm not mistaken, I think Isabela is one of the very few, Isabela and Alessia, the very few kids with CAH down here in South Florida. I joined Facebook in 2009 and I've been contacting parents since 2009. Throughout everybody that I've contacted throughout all these years, there's nobody else down here with kids that have CAH. So it's very hard for me to try to pass a law when it's just me down here. I've joined a lot of the advocacy groups. I have, but in terms of laws and trying to do that, we haven't. So what I do is I just inject them here at home and we drive to the hospital.
Now, one other thing that you mentioned is when Isabela started daycare, she went with a hand sanitizer around her neck. And I'm guessing we're trying to prevent her from getting infections.
I was just scared of her getting germs. We all know, as parents, that daycare is the time where they all get sick. They all, even if it's the healthiest child, they will get sick. But a CAH child will not just get sick. They will not just get a cold and go home and be fine. So I was trying to prevent her from, I don't know, in my mind, getting really sick or trying to at least cut some of those germs out. I don't know. My mental process, just like during the pandemic that we were all just going crazy with hand sanitizers. Back then, that was my state of mind. How can I help her stay healthy and not get as sick?
Yeah.
So, she would put the hand sanitizer before she ate, so I had like boxes of those little, spray sanitizers.
How did you learn, who spoke to you about how a child develops CAH and why Isabela developed CAH?
Well, Carrillo basically went through it with us. So she explained it to us. The pediatrician also spoke to us about it. She's still our pediatrician to this day. My husband and I obviously had to be carriers of that gene in order for her to express it.
And when both parents are carriers, then the likelihood of a child getting CAH is very much increased. So I think where we left off, we talked about daycare and then she started kindergarten.
And we had gone through that whole walking pneumonia thing. That was the last big illness that she had. And then after that, she actually got very stable. She started doing really well. She started kindergarten at the school where I was teaching. She was stable for a while. She was 5 years old. And my husband and I started talking about having another child. So during that time, it was her 5th birthday, actually. And we sat down and we're like, you know what? maybe it's time for us to try to have another child, because we always wanted to have more kids.
Yeah.
And I got pregnant. I had Giadana
Yeah.
when Isabela was 6. And then 6 years after Gia came Alessia as a surprise.
As a surprise.
So my girls are 6 years apart. All 3.
Very, very symmetrical.
That was not planned. Giadana was planned. Alessia was not.
Now, did any healthcare provider help you, or did you see a genetic counselor to sort of understand the possibility?
Yes, that's another crazy thing that us as parents with kids that have CAH go through. You're considered high risk, obviously, because of that. And then they start asking you if you want to do genetic testing. I am opposed to genetic testing. Not that there's anything wrong with it. At least in my case, I was going to have her anyway. We were already not okay, but we knew what we were doing with Isabela. So my husband and I felt, you know what? If Gia comes out with CAH, then I think we'll be even more aware. And we wanted another child. So I refused the genetic testing. The other thing that I refused was, I think it's what it's called, the dexamethasone. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Okay, so Dex is basically a medication that you can take while you're pregnant, and it helps with the ambiguous genitalia. And if you end up having a boy, they stop the medication. But if you have a girl, then you have to continue. I read the side effects, and I did not like what I read. It has very, very severe side effects for the mom, and it's not 100% that as well. But they did, as you asked me, they did talk to me about the genetic testing, and they talked to me about the DEX, and they did explain everything to me. But at the end, I decided that I was just going to have a regular pregnancy like I did with Isabel.
Yeah. So by the time you were pregnant with Gia, you already had a lot of experience caring for a child with CAH.
Exactly.
You knew what you're getting into. You knew that you knew how to do it. You had gone through terrible traumatic times, but you're on the other side of them. And as with anyone having a baby, you were prepared.
Exactly. But thankfully, then I learned that the ultrasound is that first sign that the child might have CAH. So within those 6 years, I had already read the books. I had read everything. I had been on Facebook, and I had already joined a bunch of CAH groups. I had already met all these wonderful moms. So in my ultrasounds, I'm like, do you guys see anything? Is there anything that I should be worried about? And they're like, listen, we don't see anything. Everything looks normal. So, and that's basically what happened. Gia was another C-section, but she was unaffected. We waited for the newborn screening. So you can imagine the waiting for that newborn screening. And it came back negative. She was healthy.
Great. Yeah.
There is a chance that she could develop the late onset CAH, but she's 9 years old right now, and we haven't seen any signs.
Glad to hear, of course, that Gia is healthy. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about Alessia, and you said that she was a surprise and just...
The wild one.
The wild one. And
she's my wild child.
It sounds like you kind of discovered you were pregnant without having planned it like you had with Gia.
Exactly. So even though initially we had wanted 3 kids, because we already had Isabela, affected with the CAH, and Gia was unaffected, we really didn't want to test fate and try to have another child. And they were already older. Isabela was 12, Gia was 6. We started traveling. We started just going on with life. And here comes me getting pregnant. Total surprise. We talked about it as all couples do, and we thought, what we should do. And at the end, we decided that we were just going to go ahead with the pregnancy. And we did. And again, the same process. This was not that long ago. This was in 2019. So we had a lot of information. We knew everything. The doctors are the same doctors that we've had since Isabela, like I've mentioned before. I was high risk, but more because of my age, because as women, they think when we're older, we're like high risk or something. But it was more because I was already a little bit older. But the ultrasounds came on, and that showed that she was affected. It was, what are you going to do? You know, she's there. It's a girl. Obviously, my husband wanted a boy. She's our third girl. Regular pregnancy. She was wild. So kicking all night. Yes. And then you see her in the middle of the night. That child would not stop moving. And I'm like, how is this possible? But then you meet her. And now we know why. That's it. This time we were extremely prepared.
Vast experience with CAH get you through.
Yes. The biggest problem with her is that she did not want to sleep. That was like the biggest issue with that child. You know, the crying and the not wanting to sleep. But in terms of the CAH and the birth of Alessia, it's just night and day compared to Bella.
Yeah.
My experience definitely helped, and I'll tell you why. The endo that was there with Isabela was the same endo that was there with Alessia. And I do not like that person. So when I saw him come in, I did not want to hear anything of what he said. So I looked at the dosages and I called Carrillo. That's what I did. There was a nurse there that actually knew a lot about CAH, thankfully. So we would look at the dosages together, and I would come in while I was there staying at the hospital, or my husband would come in because we would take turns, and I was still hurting from the C-section. So my husband is as aware as I am. So we would just talk to the nurse and see how she was doing. Thankfully, everything went well. The only issue that she had was actually feeding. It had nothing to do with her meds. She was having issues actually drinking enough milk, and that's why she stayed. But my backup was always Dr. Carrillo. Whenever I had a question, I would text her, or I would call her, or I would email her, and that's it. So when we went home, we knew what we had to give her. And regardless, a few days after we got home, I had to take her to the pediatrician anyway. You know, I took her to the endocrinologist. I took her back to Carrillo, constantly at the hospital taking blood tests. You know, with kids with CAH, you have to constantly do blood tests. That first year of their lives, it's just constant pricking, constant in their hands, in their feet, in their arms. It's just, you know, I remember with Bella, even in her head, it's constant just to make sure that you have enough blood to test.
So, and they're doing the blood tests because they want to check about the levels of the replacement cortisol.
The cortisol.
And I'm guessing they're also looking at sodium levels to make sure, and potassium.
And potassium. When they're babies, potassium is huge as well.
So Jihan, you have 3 wonderful daughters. 2 of them are living with CAH, although I think it's probably more accurate to say that your entire family is living with CAH.
Pretty much.
But could you share what it's like to live as part of a family with 2 daughters with CAH?
It's a lot of planning. It's a lot of thinking. It's constantly filling medications. I'm constantly at the pharmacy. It's just a lot of worrying. I'm not too worried about the little one right now because thankfully I'm at home. So she was born a few months before the pandemic. So I decided to leave teaching. I'm still a teacher. I still have my certificate, but I decided to leave and stay home with her because I did not want to expose her to COVID, obviously. But with the oldest, it's just a lot of over planning, a lot of overthinking. Just making sure that she's taking her meds. And thankfully, she's already 15 years old. So she takes her meds on her own. All I do is refill them. But it's still a worry. You're always worried about if they go, you know, at school, you know, if something happens to her. So at school, she has her 504 plan, like most CAH kids do. She talks to the nurse. There's a nurse there. You know, even in middle school, I was constantly talking to the nurse. You know, with regular kids, you just send them to school. They learn, they come back home, and, you know, and it's a regular thing. You know, make sure that they're feeling okay, you know, that she's doing well in the morning. Because if she's not feeling well in the morning, you don't know what's going to happen when she gets to school. And then, you know, it's just, again, a lot of overthinking is what I would say as a parent of CAH.
Yeah. And monitoring. And although it's great that Isabella is managing her own medications, but you still need to make sure that she's okay. She's 15. 15-year-olds don't always do things the way their parents prefer. Yes.
She's special. She's a very old soul. She's not your normal 15-year-old. She's very responsible. She's taking classes 2 years ahead. She's already doing college credits. She's very, very smart, very responsible, very loving, just a very special child.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes living with adversity and long-term illness teaches you a lot of things about life that can be used in other ways.
Very true.
So I guess I would just ask if there's anything else that you think people should know about living with CAH or other thoughts you would like to add?
Just to those moms that just found out that they have a child with CAH, my best advice is to treat them as a normal child. We never told her, don't do this because you have CAH. Don't do that. We would obviously take precautions, but we wouldn't treat her like extra special. I don't know if you guys understand what I'm saying, but, kind of like, walking on eggshells because she has a condition. Yeah. They can do any other things. She's incredible with computers. She has her friends. It's just a normal thing. It's just you have to incorporate, the medications. Also, try to get in contact with others that have gone through the same thing as you. That's very important. And that's something that I'm now talking to other moms and trying to guide them through all of this, through the medications, through the surgery. The surgery is the biggest thing that all these moms contact me with, that they're panicking. So reach out as much as you can and get as much information as you can. Don't just solely rely on the healthcare professional, because yes, they're professionals, they're doctors, but they don't have experience. They don't have the day-to-day with these kids that we do.
Yeah, that's really good advice, to treat your kids the same way you treat any kids. Also connect to the CAH community. You've been helpful to other moms. I hope others have been helpful to you.
Yes.
Jihan, you've really opened our eyes to what it's like to live with CAH, and we're so appreciative of everything that you shared. We're sorry again about the early experiences you had with healthcare, but you're now an expert in CAH, so much so that you were able to bring Alessia home very quickly, and you know how to manage it, and they're living with a chronic condition. They need to take care of themselves, they need to take their medication, and you need to keep a close eye on them. But aside from that, they're highly intelligent, very capable, and very beautiful girls. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, David.
Thank you, David. I really enjoyed being a part of the conversation with Jihan today.
Thank you.
I think what fascinates me about CAH is that it's an invisible condition. Like, these folks, for the most part, function really well on a day-to-day basis, but they do have this ongoing burden of daily medication. And it's the anticipation, right, David? It's that feeling of worry and living on the edge that they may experience an unexpected and potentially fatal adrenal crisis. And that's just terrifying for these families.
I'm glad you used the term invisible, Mandy, because for most people, it doesn't show on the outside. And if you recall, part 1 of our podcasts about CAH featured Erica. I think you could say that her CAH is pretty much invisible. But when talking about Bella's early weeks of life, Bella's CAH was anything but invisible. Bella really was not doing well. So when the condition is not well controlled, it is not invisible, and it is very threatening to the life of a person with CAH.
I completely agree, David. I think that it becomes even more critical that you have a healthcare team that understands CAH in order to manage it, not just at birth, but throughout the lifespan.
Jihan's story is really about 2 very different experiences in healthcare, and Dr. Carrillo may have really saved Bella's life.
Thank you, David. And a very special thanks also to Dr. Shaywitz for really helping us understand CAH a little bit more. Thanks to our producer, Amy Brooks. To learn more about CAH, please visit aiunited.org, caresfoundation.org, or themagicfoundation.org. If you like this podcast, please subscribe. Thanks for being with us today, and join us for our next conversation on Rare.